And for those who haven't met me, I'm Rob Darcy. I'm a principal consultant with Lucian Group Delta Simons. Been working with the business for just over 2 years now within the sustainability team. So we've got a team, a growing team within our ranks. We're looking at all sorts of stuff to do with carbon assessments, energy assessments as well, ESG. I think I'm going to make a start now. So yeah, again, thanks to everybody that has joined. Lunch and Learn today is going to be on the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, Phase 3. It's a mandatory assessment that requires large undertakings to participate. We'll explain what that means in a moment. There's 3 core objectives to what I'm going to be discussing today. By and large, I want to increase our awareness in ESOS, the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme. It's a bit of a mouthful, so I'll just refer to it as ESOS from here on. I'm going to inform people taking part today about the compliance requirements and key changes since Phase 2. We'll be discussing the difference between the energy assessment and the audit process, and also finally finishing off with a few tips for best practice when it comes to energy action plans, which were one of the changes that were introduced as part of Phase 3. Participants now need to do an energy action plan. So there was a note, an article that we wrote for Building Better Partnership, which was all on the energy action plans, and that recently went out in around Easter. So firstly, the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, what is it? It's something that was introduced as part of Article 8 of the EU Directive in 2014. It's obviously since been transposed into UK law. We, as a nation, still are working towards ESOS compliance for various reasons. It's mainly to promote energy efficiency and to take demand off the grid. It's a mandatory assessment, as I said earlier, for large undertakings. We'll go into what that means in a moment, and corporate groups. The main purpose, as the name would suggest, is to identify those opportunities to ramp down energy to improve efficiency. Core requirements. Traditionally, there have been these 6 core requirements. So participating companies are required to measure their total energy consumption from buildings, transport, and industrial processes. And by process energy, we mean if you're involved in manufacturing, that's where your process energy would be, right? So there's implications if you're a large energy consumer. You have to identify significant energy usage. So that's to cover 95% of your total energy consumption. There's a de minimis allowance of 5% for Phase 3, which means that if transport, for instance, is nominal, then actually you can exclude it. The same applies to a subsidiary. If it's a minor subsidiary that doesn't really consume much, then you can make the call to exclude that as your de minimis allowance. Participants also need to appoint a lead energy assessor. I'm a lead energy assessor for Lucian Group, which means I can sign off on our ESOS assessment. So we are doing an ESOS assessment for Palatine and its subsidiaries, and we'll explore maybe some of the complexities of that in a moment. We need to conduct an energy audit as a participant and identify costed recommendations. So that takes quite a bit of work looking into payback periods as well. The Environment Agency are the scheme administrator, so final compliance needs to go to the Environment Agency, and participants also need to retain a evidence pack should the EA come knocking and want to see a bit of detail behind that. There's been a number of key changes introduced to ESOS Phase 3 since the previous phase. The de minimis allowance, for instance, has changed. It was 10% in Phase 2. It's now 5%, which means that participants need to audit a much greater percentage, 95% as opposed to 90% of their total energy consumption. The reason that the EA and BEIS have done that is because they're tightening up standards. They're bringing in more groups of companies into this ESOS assessment, and they want us to identify savings across a wider part of our building portfolio, our transport activities, our process activities. And for Phase 4, they're already thinking about what that compliance requirement is going to look like, and standards are going to get tighter as well for that. The deadline for notification was the 31st of December 2023. That was extended to the 5th of June 24, following a period of consultation by the EA as they look to introduce a few changes. For instance, you now need to include an energy intensity metric. I was asked the other day by a client whether this information goes public. Phase 2 did not make information public as far as I could tell, but as part of phase 3, there is going to be public disclosure. You are also required to produce an action plan that needs to be submitted by the 31st of December this year. And if you don't do that, the Environment Agency are going to publicly state that you've not done that and you're not taking action to ramp down your energy usage. So there are implications for investors and stakeholder relationships. I won't say too much on this other than there are other routes to compliance. Whilst the ESOS audit is prioritized, you can conduct other activities to achieve your compliance. So if, for instance, your buildings were covered by a Green Deal assessment, you had ISO 50001, which is the energy management system across industrial processes, and your ESOS energy activity looked at transport audits, then you've met your compliance or obligations. But as I say, the ESOS energy audit is the one that's prioritized and preferred. In addition, there's several key dates to be aware of. The one to hold on to in your mind as we go through this is the first one there, the qualification date, which is the 31st of December 2022. So if you are a large undertaking on that date, then you're likely going to have to do an assessment. There is a rule, 2-year rule. So if you need to be a large undertaking for 2 consecutive years across a 4-year period, and if you meet that, then you're going to have to do an ESOS assessment. The compliance phase, as I said, across a 4-year period, the 6th of December 2019 is where it begins. That's the end of phase 2 to the 5th of December 23. And then you've got the compliance deadline as well, which is the one that I said has been amended. So you've got the deadline now is the 5th of June 2024, whereas it originally was the 5th of December 23. Looking at who qualifies for ESOS, as I said, there is some criteria to this. So if you're an organization that's identified to be a large undertaking on that qualification date of the 31st of December 2022 for that 2 consecutive year periods within the 4 previous years, then you need to do an ESOS assessment. A large undertaking means somebody that has, or a business that has 250 or more employees in the UK. Failing that, do you meet the thresholds for turnover and also balance sheet? So are you making in sales 44 million and above? Is your balance sheet exceeding 38 million? Group participation is also something that needs to be carefully understood. Rather than go through it on this slide, I'll go through it in a moment. But effectively, if you're part of a group and a single subsidiary in that group, it meets either of these criteria in 1 and 2, then there's a good chance you're also going to need to undertake an ESOS assessment. So illustrated for you there, do you have 250 employees? Yes, then you need to qualify. If not, do you meet both the thresholds for turnover and balance sheet, in which case you would also need to qualify. When it comes to group participation, as I said, this could have implications for companies, and it's important that it's carefully understood. I'm going to illustrate this through 3 scenarios. So looking at scenario number 1, you've got 3 business entities there, A, B, and C. Now, all 3 of these would need to do an ESOS assessment, or they need to be a single assessment that includes all 3 entities. They can either disaggregate and do it off their own back, or they do that one assessment, which includes all business activities. The reason being is entity C meets the threshold criteria for employment. So they've got 300 employees. They're over the employment threshold. So under regulations, everybody in that group scenario needs to do an ESOS assessment. Same scenario, you've got 3 entities, but in this case, whilst C has 300 employees, they're overseas, whereas A and B are small businesses, small headcount, small balance sheet and turnover, so they don't actually need to do an ESOS assessment in that situation. What we're seeing is the third and final scenario, which is a lot more complex. We're seeing a lot more of this with clients that have a really detailed and complex relationship with their subsidiaries and their parent companies. They don't always have the best sight of who's within their business and their group setting, but it needs to be carefully understood because whilst A in this scenario is overseas, B is in effect acting as the highest UK parent because actually they've got over 250 staff, or they meet the compliance criteria for balance sheet and turnover. So actually all 4 UK entities in the UK would need to participate and do an assessment that covers off their compliance requirements, either individually, disaggregated, or under one aggregated assessment. So we're going to spend a bit of time I think it's important to take a look at some of the key drivers behind ESOS. What's the purpose of this? Why are we even doing this? 2021 saw increased energy price volatility due to the surge in natural gas prices. This was caused by, an unexpected European cold snap. There was increased demand from China for liquid nitrogen gas, increased global demand as well for gas, a shortfall in imported nuclear energy due to reactors in France being taken offline, destabilized UK energy due to companies such as Bulb going under. So you've got less supply there. Demand's going up, supply's going down. So obviously prices are going to go up. And also, as we all know, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has led to supply problems as well, along with a whole host of socioeconomic issues as well and political problems. Businesses in the UK, particularly those are large businesses, will operate on or they'll purchase gas and electricity on a day ahead rates on a wholesale market. So this graph shows the variation in day ahead rates from, let's say, around April 21 to where we are now. This is a live graph. I took it off Gem earlier this week. So this was correct as of April 24. It shows the pence per therm in gas. So therm is a unit of measurement for gas, cubic meters, kilowatt hours, similar, right? So you can see it's peaked in September 22. And whilst it's going down now, I know in my own domestic environment that prices are still higher than they used to be. In the commercial setting or corporate setting, having worked within live environments, I know traditionally we used to pay 3 or 5 pence per kilowatt hour for gas, whereas I guess in around 2022, January, February 2022, we were looking at 10 pence, 15 pence, 20 pence. Same with electricity, traditionally somewhere between 14 pence or 12 pence if you were lucky. And in around that same period of January 22, which is when Russia invaded Ukraine, actually that jumped to closer to 20 pence per kilowatt hour. So you could think about the implications that has on a business where you're seeing your electricity and gas prices increase twofold, threefold, and what that might mean to your budget. So that's why it's important for us to remain on top of our energy efficiency commitments. There's also commitments related to our UK climate policies, so mandatory carbon reports such as the SECR, which goes into our financial records. Each of these require accurate measurement of energy consumption data. So whilst the qualification requirements for each might vary, these are aligned. So the idea is that if you're doing your SECR, which is an annual submission, rather than the ESOS, which is once every 4 years, you've got that data there, so it should make life easier for you. It reduces duplication of efforts and administrative costs, and actually that data can feed into your ESOS assessment if you do it successfully. Also provides a degree of flexibility. Some of the benefits of the ESOS assessment noted here, I won't read out all of them, but in effect, it allows businesses to identify energy savings opportunities. It allows them to cost out those opportunities as well. So if you're thinking about overhauling your HVAC, your heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, you might say, okay, fair enough, we've got a proposal in place, but what's the payback period going to be? Is it feasible? Is it technically feasible? Is it financially feasible? Same with LED lighting. Have we really considered this? Even just having a tool, using ESOS and its recommendations as a tool to spur on conversations with, I don't know, director levels or people at board level. I've seen that done, and it's an effective tool. Corporate drivers behind ESOS. So without ESOS, you risk missing out on cost-saving opportunities. There's increased investor risk and shareholder risk. You're potentially putting yourself at risk of fines from the Environment Agency and sanctions, and there's that reputational damage as well. Whereas if you undertake a successful ESOS assessment, you're more resilient to price volatility, cost savings, financial stability as well, which might lead to further investment. You're legally compliant, and there's improved relationships with suppliers, which promotes brand image. So I mentioned that we're going to take a look at the difference between the audit and the assessment. The energy assessment demonstrates how organizations can improve their performance. So looking at energy use, consumption, and efficiency. The energy assessor has a few responsibilities as well. So they'll take a look at the audit scope and agree a methodology with the client. measure total energy consumption, identify that significant energy consumption, covering off 95% of your total energy use, conduct the energy audits, although clients can do this themselves. The assessor would need to sign off. You would also be responsible for auditing other audit areas, if that's a DEC or Green Deal assessment, provide findings and recommendations, and then there's also the final sign-off report that you would be required to deliver. I won't touch upon this. It's basically going through what I've already discussed there, just illustrated out. One thing that assessors should do is make sure that the assessment covers a 12-month period, inclusive of that reference period. So for phase 3, as I said, remembering that date is the 31st of December 2022, your assessment needs to make sure that for buildings, transport, and industrial processes, the same 12 months worth of data is used, inclusive of that date there. So that arrow in black is the reference period. The qualification date's also illustrated, and compliance dates. The only thing that's changed, as I said, it was traditionally the 5th of December 2022. The compliance deadline is actually now the 5th of June 24. The audit differs because it's an on-site check of procedures on a given site. So it dissects, it analyzes, it evaluates a range of activities, processes, behaviors on a given site. So they need to comply as well with minimum standards. So audits must analyze energy consumption data for a whole year. However, whilst the assessment must include that reference period, the energy audit doesn't need to. It could be anywhere within that 4-year compliance period. It needs to avoid auditing site locations that were included within phase 2. So any buildings included in phase 2 shouldn't be audited again. You need to identify areas of significant energy use and also determine potential savings. So prioritize life cycle cost assessments where you can, depending if there's data availability, over simple payback periods. I've already mentioned that last point. But yeah, you need to make sure these audits are reviewed by your lead ESOS assessor. With regards to the energy audit, there's a few tips for best practice. It's important that businesses and participating companies identify significant energy demand. So where is the material issue? There's no point in auditing sites and processes that actually aren't that significant. You need to make sure that you're including things that the Environment Agency will say, yeah, you have done a robust assessment, that is significant, and you've done a good job there. It's important to understand settings and timings. I'll go into sites often, and those timings that might be on your AC systems, your heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems haven't been reviewed since they were installed, perhaps due to poor handover from the construction build phase to operational phase. It's important that we prioritize meter data over bills and any estimations. It's important also to identify high base loads and out of hours energy. So we've done cooling degree day assessments and heating degree day assessments for recent clients, which has said, actually, you know what, during the winter months, you are using a significant amount of AC based on the meter data. Why is that? Or in reverse, in the summer months, your heat's on. Why is that? Or there's nobody in the office during those hours. Why are we using similar amounts of energy as to when it's peak operational usage? It's important to involve relevant stakeholders and also to develop an audit checklist. And I've done some work with Ben Blowers, who was on the GIS lunch and learn a few weeks back, developing a survey on Survey 123, which is streamlining our process and making sure we could do audits a lot more quickly. And that's now live and ready to go. We can walk into a site and use a tablet to do our audits moving forward. I'm going to quickly look at the opportunities that exist for, energy reduction. Just looking at a case study, for instance, we were working with a leading British airline business to do their ESOS Phase 3 compliance assessment. This involved an audit of buildings, hangars, offices, simulation centres where the pilots and flight staff go to train, and also supporting their internal process energy audit. We calculated payback. We did a CREM assessment, which is a carbon real estate monitor, to say actually at what point, if you continue in your current trajectory, will you strand and incur further costs if you don't decarbonize your building? Outcome, 99,000 megawatt hours of energy savings identified, largely through process energy savings. Now, my responsibility there wasn't to go in and tell them how they're going to redesign planes and reuse fuel, because they're far ahead of the curve on that. But we use ESOS as a tool to start conversations with, I guess, flight managers and operators that are traditionally sat in your control towers and monitoring data and live operations, saying actually what systems and what procedures are already in place, and actually how can we, I guess, cost the savings that are going to be associated with your future plans. With regards to building energy, we looked at building fabric, recommending insulation improvements, double glazing. We gave them two options to improve their heat systems. So either stick to your current pathway, boiler upgrades, or B, you could electrify your heating through, I guess, variable refrigerant flow systems, which is electric heating, really. Your cooling plant's also old, so actually can you promote high seasonal energy efficiency above 5.5? You've got significant HVAC demand, so how can you rationalize your office space and co-locate? Why are we using this entire office space when on a Monday and a Friday we know there's only 20% of your staff in? And energy sub-metering strategies as well, which supported data visibility. Wider opportunities would include, and this is from other projects, BMS, or building management system reviews, looking at timers and schedules, LED installation, staff awareness campaigns, maintenance schedules, etc., or trying to promote the energy hierarchy in the top right hand corner there. There's also a number of other tools, and this is my penultimate slide. So typically you might start off with a client saying, actually, let's position yourself right now as a business across those 6 different categories. What does your energy policy look like? How might that be improved? What's who's accountable right now, and what's the buy-in from management? What's the motivation? How can we use marketing and communications to get the message across that we're trying to become a more efficient business? And what opportunities are there for investment to actually find some capital funding? We recently delivered an article, I think I said this at the beginning, for Building Better Partnership. It was all about the ESOS action plan. So there's some key dates for the action plan. Basically, by the end of this year, we need to, any participants should have an action plan in place, and you need to submit regular progress reports, 2 of them across 2025 and 2026. With regards to initiatives, it's important that this action plan reviews policy and involves stakeholders, and to get buy-in and commitment, you need to make sure you've, I guess, appropriately evaluated your performance. Perhaps use that energy management matrix to do a gap analysis, develop a sound business case, integrate this strategy and this action plan within your overall corporate strategy to make sure it's successful. And then finally, make sure you communicate, as I said earlier, internally and externally on your progress.